Good afternoon. I am Carl Nath, and I'm truly delighted to welcome you and to introduce our speaker at today's Grand Rounds, Dr. Vincent Rajkumar, whose presentation is entitled The Cost of Prescription Drugs, Insulin and Beyond, What Can We Do? Dr. Rajkumar is a consultant in the Division of Hematology and the Edward W. and Betty Knight Scripps Professor of Medicine at Mayo Clinic. Dr. Rajkumar has devoted his entire career to the study of multiple myeloma and related disorders, and his seminal contributions include pioneering clinical trials, the introduction of novel therapies, improvement of existing therapies, epidemiologic studies, laboratory-based research, and the elucidation of such topics, among others, as the prevalence and progression of monoclonal gammopathies, racial disparities in the disease, and familial predisposition. Dr. Rajkumar's ascendancy in the field and his H-index at 139 are truly meteoric. Indeed, little after more than being on staff for a decade at Mayo Clinic, Dr. Rajkumar and his work was highlighted in 2011 in the journal The Lancet by an article charmingly entitled From Madras, India to Minnesota and Multiple Myeloma. His national and international stature in the field is recognized by numerous awards, including the highly prestigious Robert A. Kyle Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2018, Dr. Rajkumar was the recipient of the Mayo Clinic Distinguished Investigator Award. Distinguished scholarship becomes especially unique when the responsible scholar is also imbued with admirable human virtues, a capacity to give back, and a commitment and generosity that unstintingly support and promote colleagues and communities. Such is indeed the case with Dr. Rajkumar, and it is because of his heightened sense of social mindedness and social concern that his interest in the cost of prescription drugs, the topic of today's Grand Rounds, arose. And like everything that Dr. Rajkumar does, he studied and commanded the field with inimitable comprehension and superb mastery. It is thus my true privilege to introduce Dr. Rajkumar and today's Grand Rounds presentation.
Oh, Carl, when you give that kind of introduction, it leaves me speechless. How am I going to give a talk now? So this talk will be in three parts. It's really very complicated topic, but the part one is the problem, which is quite bad. Part two is the reasons for the problem, which are infuriating. And part three are solutions, which are difficult but not impossible. I have no financial conflicts to disclose, but this itself is probably a problem because it allows me to speak very freely against pharma without fear of anything coming back at me. I'm not an economist, but I've studied the problem of prescription drug class for the last 10 years in detail. Dr. Siddiqui and I wrote an article in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings in 2012, which actually summarizes many of the problems and the solutions that I'm going to discuss today. I also have a unique vantage point in the sense that I'm not an enemy of pharma. I actually work really closely with pharma, more than most people. I've done many regulatory trials with these people, including 8 randomized controlled trials. I will start off with multiple myeloma because this is my field, and I'll tell you how myeloma is today. The total number of myeloma patients diagnosed in 2017 is 30,000. The total lifetime costs of treating just the patients diagnosed in 2017 would be $22.4 billion. And that excludes hospital costs, infusion costs, laboratory costs, imaging costs, physician costs, nursing costs, ancillary costs, just drugs. Why? Because we have many drugs for myeloma. Patients live for many years and they're on continuous therapy. And so they take these drugs year after year after year after year, and every drug is expensive, including old ones like thalidomide at $60,000 a year, lenalidomide, the analog, at $168,000 a year, and so on. The problem is we also don't use these drugs alone. We mix them. And so we give 3 or 4 drugs together in combination. And so you're really talking about $200,000, $300,000 a year for a regimen that we use for myeloma. And this can go on sometimes for years. And now there is talk of 4 drugs, and there's talk of CAR T therapy. I don't know about you, but 20 years of Mayo Clinic, my entire 403B wouldn't help pay for even like 18 months of treatment. And in case we're thinking we have insurance, think again, because you might have a 25% copay that'll give you maybe a few more years of of cost. So myeloma is a very expensive disease to treat, and I have this slide just for an analogy. 1 week of the most commonly used myeloma regimen we use can allow you to buy 10 of these LED 4K 50-inch televisions. And these have innovation too. I mean, if you take a look at these 4K TVs that are sold for $400, you open them up, it is amazing. It's a work of art. There's so many components, so many patents, so much innovation, and yet you could buy 10 of this for just 1 week of BRT. Pharmaceutical companies usually come up with 4 arguments on why cost of drugs is just so high. Number 1, the high cost of drug development. It costs a lot to make new drugs. The drugs themselves, they give you far more benefit than televisions. They prolong life, they're very, very good. Number 3, they'll say, do not come near us, market forces will decide. And number 4, anything you try to suppress cost will stifle innovation. I will tell you all 4 of them are not true. It does not take $1 billion to make a new drug. Many, many of these new drugs, as I will show you, work or improve survival only by a month or 2. They are not like prolonging life by 5 years, 10 years. There is no free market. In fact, what we have is the opposite of free market. And the ability to charge a very high price, regardless of whether the drug works for 1 month or 1 year or 10 years, is actually the enemy of innovation. Why innovate if you can make the same amount of money by a Me Too drug? High prices of drugs can be justified by cost of all of these factors, but when the drug is launched at a very high price, all of these arguments cannot be used to justify how the price of the drug that is already high to start with goes up year after year after year. The same drug, it's not an improvement. So here are targeted therapies, like many of them, and you can look at the cost of the same drug from 2005 to 2017. There's an article in the JCO. You can see the same drug price goes up year after year after year. It's not just cancer drugs targeted therapy. This is, for those of you in the neurology department, this is cost of multiple sclerosis drugs. Every year goes up, same drug. Well, you might say new drugs, the innovative, we somehow need to keep increasing the cost. But it happens with old drugs too. The best case is Daraprim. Daraprim is nothing but pyrimethamine made in the 1950s for the treatment of toxoplasmosis. Turing Pharmaceuticals bought the rights to this generic drug in 2015, and overnight they raised the price of the drug from $13.50 to $750 a tablet. You might think this is outrageous. This must be illegal. In fact, the CEO who made this happen, Martin Shkreli, was dragged to testify into the Senate. He actually came back and he gave an interview in which he virtually called congressmen imbeciles, because what he did, he said, was legal. And he was just doing whatever the law allowed. He is in jail now, but not because he raised the price of the drug. That's for a different reason. But you could go to Hy-Vee today and the price of Daraprim is still $738. I just checked, per tablet. I'm very active on social media, so I just did, before this talk, like a month ago, I asked the people in social media, hey, can you make me a list of drugs where prices have gone up outrageously? Like insulin, 1,200%, Daraprim, 5,000%. I don't know what Acthar is, but 97,000%. And I had so many responses. People pulled up papers where drug prices had gone up 18,000%, 7,000%, 500%, and so on. I had more than 100 drugs in the United States where prices had gone up outrageously. Which brings us to insulin. Alex Smith was 23 when he was diagnosed with diabetes, type 1 diabetes. He's not from some faraway country. This person is from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Alex Smith was working as a restaurant manager, and as you know, at the age of 26, you go off your mother's insurance. So June 1st, he went off his mother's insurance, and he had to get his own insurance. When he researched it, he found that the lowest insurance he could get was $7,600 deductible and $430 a month premium. So he said, I don't have that kind of money. I will just buy insulin. Well, little did he know that the cost of insulin was $1,300 a month for the 3 vials or 4 vials that he needed. He said, I will try and make do for the rest of the month with the insulin, and then this is June 1st, 2017, 2 years ago. And then I will somehow make up with my salary to get my insulin for next month. June 27th, he was found dead in his apartment of diabetic ketoacidosis. This is Minnesota. This is his mother, Nicole Smith, who attended the State of the Union with Amy Klobuchar last night. She's been campaigning against the cost of insulin. Rationing of insulin is not something that happens in other countries, but it's very common in the United States. This study by Yale found that 25% of diabetics ration their insulin because they cannot afford it. Another study by WebMD found more than 40% of patients have at some point in time reduced the dose of insulin that they need because they cannot afford it. Here are the facts. 30 million diabetics in the United States. 30% of the diabetics take insulin. But for the 1.3 million with type 1 diabetes, insulin is a life-saving drug. Without insulin, they will die. This is life in the last 20 years in the United States. Some things have not changed. Price of new cars, household furnishings, clothing, about the same price from 1997 till now. Some things have gone up in price: food, wages, childcare, hospital services, tuition. Some things have gone down, as you all know: cell phones, software, televisions. This is insulin. This is courtesy Lolly Daggle, who's Hannah, who's is a diabetic who posted this, and this has been shown in social media many times. The same insulin goes up. It's not a different insulin. It's not like they improved the insulin to be more effective. Or the same Humalog, which used to cost $20 in 1997, is $274 in 2017 and $300+ now. The same insulin that you could go to Costco in Canada and buy without a prescription for $20, or Mexico or Europe and buy it for $5 or $10. So we come to part 2, which is why. Why this insanity? Number one, we have a vulnerable population. It's almost like ransom. You either pay up or you die. Patients are willing to pay anything to have access to life-saving drugs. I see it every day with cancer. They will sell their house for their loved one. They will do whatever it takes. Doesn't matter what the cost is. They will do it. Number two, it's a monopoly. For many cancer drugs, there's only one company that's making that one drug, and if you either you have it or not, so the company can raise the price whatever they want. For some other cancers, you might say, like, well, there are 3 or 4 drugs. Well, for a myeloma, for example, there may be many drugs, but each drug works only for 1 year. So when that drug fails, then you have to go to the next drug, and then the next drug. So each one is, in effect, a monopoly. You cannot say, I won't use lenalidomide, I use only bortezomib, because one day bortezomib won't work. So the companies know that. What's going on with insulin? Well, 3 companies, Novo Nordisk, Sanofi, Aventis, and Eli Lilly, control 99% of the market. Every insulin sold in the United States is made by these 3 companies. So they virtually have a monopoly. Just 3 companies rule the roost. Then the third problem is what I call covert patent evergreening. What they do is, you would say insulin was made in 1921. By now the patent must have run out. But what they do is, 1923, they sold the patent for just $1 each, $3, the inventors of insulin. And then you can see that in 1946, there is a new and improved version that is patented that prolongs the patent life. That's NPH. The 1950s, Lente insulin is patented. 1970s, there is improved pure insulins, monopeak insulins that are patented. By 1980s, the recombinant insulins are patented. And 1990s, analog insulin is patented. And in the 2000s, you have long-acting analog insulins that are patented. So you patent and patent and patent newer and newer variations. So you continue the monopoly on these products for as long as you can. Patenting once, it's okay. Patenting many times is wonderful. So what they do is they take the same Lantus, and there are 74 patents on Lantus, which means you have another 37 years of monopoly protection. Number 4, even if you do all this stuff, I mean, surely you can go back and use the old insulin. Well, sorry, you can't. Why? Because of what is called planned obsolescence. This is my term. It's just like what Apple does. When Apple introduced iPhone 10, they take away the other ones, right? You can't go and buy an iPhone 2 for $200. Same thing happens with insulin. All the old ones are retired. There are some old ones hanging around, but what they do, planned obsolescence part 2, is they make sure that the physicians are educated so that if you were to use the old one, you must be living in the past. That's really passé. I mean, why would you use a very ancient form of insulin? So I was giving endocrine grand rounds, and I was surprised. One of the senior consultants said, I cannot understand why my colleagues, younger colleagues, wouldn't use NPH. That still works just as fine. But continuing medical education to show new is better, makes old is not gold. Old is like mold. You have to eradicate it. You just have to get rid of the old ones. You have to use only the new ones. This happens with Gleevec and nilotinib, Dr. Ferry will tell you. This happens with everything that we do in medicine. When the new one comes, you kind of are educated not to use the old one. And then they go after the patients. This is a real ad that was then reproduced and published in the New England Journal of Medicine when the analog insulins came out. Well, they said this guy is 4 years old and he's already living in the past. You know why? Because he's giving himself an old insulin. So ask your doctor about the new one. So planned obsolescence is number 4. And then number 5 is, what about the generic companies? With insulin, it's a biologic, so you call it biosimilar. So biosimilar and generic. What about those kind of products? Why can't they come in and take this marketplace? Well, they can't because the US has some of the biggest obstacles in terms of FDA regulations, in terms of how a new drug comes in. Number 2 is people try. I mean, with insulin, many companies have tried to come in with a biosimilar, but immediately they will be hit with a lawsuit. Sanofi will hit a lawsuit against your coming in, and that might be a frivolous lawsuit, but it'll prolong 2-3 years of lawsuit before the drug can come in. This has actually happened with insulin. And then there's pay for delay, which is Novartis just had to pay money to settle the suit because they pay the generic company a huge amount of money to just not come into the market. Just go away, I'll give you the money. If you know how much Big Pharma tries to prevent generics from coming in, when you have the time, just watch Fire in the Blood, which tells you the HIV story of how HIV medications, affordable HIV medications for use in Africa were for many years prevented by drug companies for patent reasons. There's a very riveting movie. It's available on Netflix. There are a couple of biosimilars which finally managed to make it through. But guess what? They're made by Big Pharma. So they're priced almost the same as all these other analog insulins. Then there is price collusion. Now this I will call it as collusion because I can't know for sure whether they're colluding, but it's tacit understanding, which is I increase my price, you increase your price, we both are happy, we both make money. So you can see here Lantus and Levemir are competitors made by 2 different companies, and you can see every time one price goes up, the other one goes up. Every time one goes up, the other one goes up, and it's been going on like this for years. Same thing with Humalog and Novolog. This is not what happens in any other product that we buy. I mean, we always look for the cheaper product. But with prescription drugs, there's almost like because there's only 2 or 3 companies, there's a tacit collusion where price of one goes up, then the other goes up, and both of them are happy. Why not make money, both of us together? Why lower the price and profit? This, I'm sorry for the pun, but this is otherwise called erectile pricing because it was first reported with Viagra. Viagra was introduced for $7, and then now you can buy it for $60. The price of Viagra, as it goes up every few months, you would think when Cialis came in 2003, that will just go away. No. Or Levitra comes, no. All three go up exactly lockstep. Lockstep. When one goes up, the other goes up. That's why it's called erectile pricing for many reasons. But price change occurring in lockstep is something that should be of concern to us. Then the middlemen. You all remember the story of EpiPen when the price of EpiPen went up from $50 to $600 for a 2-pack. And Heather Bresch, the CEO of Mylan, was hauled up in front of Congress. Astonishingly, she said, "Oh, I am very concerned about the rising price of EpiPen. You're the CEO, you raised the price." But she said, "It's not me, it's all the middlemen. We make the same money. It's these middlemen, the pharmacy benefit managers, the insurers, the wholesalers, the pharmacy retailers. They are the ones who are making the money." So I want to just take a couple minutes to just go through the slide with you because you guys need to know this very carefully. Pharma company, when they make a new drug, they set what is called the list price. Then they mark it up and sell it to the wholesaler. Then the wholesaler marks it up and sells it to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy marks it up and sells it to the patient. A high price helps everyone in the supply chain. The wholesaler gets 10% cut, pharmacy gets 10% cut. If you price this at $1, everybody will get $1. If you price it at $1,000, now you'll get more money. So because there is a percent going to everybody in the supply chain, a high list price helps everybody in the supply chain. So the other problem is that you would think that the insurance company or the pharmacy benefit manager is putting down $110, the consumer is paying $20 to pay this $130. But that's not how it works. What the patient doesn't know is that there's a big rebate that's almost like a kickback coming into the pharmacy benefit manager straight from the drug company that nobody knows about. That is the problem. That's rebate. The higher the list price, the higher the rebate. So if you imagine, this will likely go up and up and up because both the pharma company and the pharmacy benefit manager are going to be happier with a higher list price because they both make a cut. The wholesaler's pharmacy, they're happy too. They're getting a higher cut. The only person who's getting really into trouble are the cash-paying patients who have to pay the full $130. This will be the poor uninsured patients, like Alex Smith. Or it's like the immigrant who comes to the United States for medication and then finds everything is multiple high. There's another problem with rebates, and this is another slide which walks you through it. Let's say there are 2 hepatitis C drugs. These are wonder drugs. They can cure hepatitis C. One of them is Zapatier, list price $54,000 for a course. Harvoni is the other one, list price $94,000 for a course. So this one is $40,000 cheaper. The copay for your patients is always based on the list price, not what the net price is after rebates and all that. So it's the list price that depends. So the patient will pay $4,900 for Zapatier and $6,900 for Harvoni, $2,000 more for the more expensive drug. You would think that if you're a pharmacy benefit manager or an insurer, you will keep Zapatier on the formulary because it's cheaper, and your patient will pay $2,000 less. But no, a study done showed that 14 out of 25 plans in Baltimore area where they did the study did not cover the cheaper option. Almost everybody covered Harvoni. Why? Because there is a big rebate that goes to the pharmacy benefit manager with the big list price. So even though the patient is going to end up paying more, the pharmacy benefit manager will tell them, you can only take Harvoni, you cannot take Zapatier. Health Affairs later on looked at it, pharmacy benefit managers, the same thing, monopoly. 3 PBMs control 80% of the market. Optum, Express Scripts, CVS. 3 wholesalers control 90% of the market. So there's basically these 6 players, and the pharma basically can set whatever they want. But Peter Bach did a study in which he found that even if you blame the middlemen maybe account only for this much of the problem. By and large, most of the profit is still going to pharmaceutical companies. So let's not take the eye off the ball in the sense that you can go and reform the middlemen as much as you want, but you will save only 1/3 of the cost. 2/3 is still pharma. And then the pharma lobby. They're very powerful. anytime you try to do something, they will either blame the PBMs or they will just give so much money that nothing really gets done. Insulin prices of drugs that I've talked about, it's reflective of a very large systemic prescription drug problem in the US. The annual cost of prescription drug spending has been going up dramatically since 2000, quite a bit since 2005 after Medicare Modernization Act. You can see we are spending about $360 billion on prescription drugs, of which Medicare spends $130 billion. Part D Medicare spends $100 and Part B spends about $30 billion, just for you to get some perspective. New cancer drugs, this is launch price of cancer drugs from 2000. You can see the first time that they're launched on the market, the price at launch is going up year after year after year, so that in 2017, all new cancer drugs approved in 2017 were launched at a price of $100,000 or more per year, average price $150. Some are testing the waters with $400,000, $500,000 per year treatment. There are two other reasons that are unique to the US besides those 8 that I mentioned. And one is that the biggest purchaser of drugs, Medicare, is prevented by law from negotiating. Number 2, the reimbursement system we have encourages physicians, if you have 2 equal drugs, one more expensive, it encourages physicians to give the more expensive one because the take home is higher with the more expensive ones. Another big problem is that there are no allies. Like as physicians, most people, as I told you, many physicians in practice who are not salaried get more money every time they give a more expensive drug. So they're not out there protesting high drug prices. Professional organizations and patient organizations are hugely funded by pharma. So they are not out there protesting pharma practices. Pharmacy benefit managers, need I say more? Patients, you would think patients will be up in arms. Patients will be going there and fighting for lower prices. But what happens is that this is North Tex Yelak, a person on Twitter. He's my close friend, Yelak Biru. He's a patient with multiple myeloma, not my patient, but he's active. He posted this and he told me I could share this with you. This is his January monthly cost for his myeloma therapy. He got a bill $15,000 for the Revlimid, $10,000 for Ninlaro. His copay was $3,000 for Revlimid and $2,000 for Ninlaro. You would think he'll protest. What they do is there's copay assistance programs which kick in, which will take away the copay problem for the patients. And the copay assistance programs are funded by pharma. So what happens is the patients are silenced. They don't have to protest because they're getting their drugs for very low copays. Most of the copay is taken care of by copay assistance programs. Pharma is getting a great deal. Not only is the patient silenced, but you give $2,000 and I'll get $8,000 in return. If you didn't give the $2,000, patient won't have money to buy any drugs. So they have a really good system going here, and this is a big problem why we have this situation. So part 3 is what can we do? I'll start with federal and state policy level. There are many, many proposals on the table. Last time I gave this talk several years ago, it was dismal. I was not optimistic at all. But now I am really optimistic that something will happen. This is a national conversation. Everybody's talking about it. Both sides of the aisle, they want to do something about it. Patients are indeed feeling the pinch. So maybe something will get done. So I'm optimistic. And I'll just update you on the most promising proposals that seem to be out there. Number 1 is value-based pricing. In every other developed country, approval of a drug is only first of 2 steps. You approve the drug and then you set the price. You need to set the price, unlike for televisions or iPhones, because you're granting this person a monopoly. For many years, only they and they alone can make this drug. So countries, Germany, France, Italy, Canada, they all sit down with the pharma company and negotiate a price based on the value that the drug provides. We are the only country which doesn't do that. Therefore, I don't know if this projects well, a drug that works, that prolongs overall survival by 1 month and a drug that prolongs overall survival by 10 months will be priced the same because we don't adjust the price based on the value that's provided. Value-based pricing is critical, and no one is arguing about paying a very high price for a real miracle like Gleevec. But people are having a problem where you can make a drug that prolongs survival by 1 month, 1 week, or maybe not even prolonged survival, and you can still charge $100,000 for it. That's where the problem is. Now, there are some movements here in this regard. The Institute for Clinical and Economic Review is a private organization that just comes up with, this is what the drug's actually worth. And some pharma companies are taking them up on the offer. Most recent case is the PCSK9 alirocumab. I don't use that drug, but that's made by Regeneron. ICER said these PCSK9s are worth only $4,000 a month, $4,000 a year, I guess, as opposed to $14,000. And the company did reduce their price to $4,000. So maybe that'll happen. Number two is Medicare should negotiate for prices. The Medicare should not negotiate for prices law was passed as part of the Medicare Modernization Act of 2003. It was passed in the middle of the night. The architect of this law that was passed at 3 a.m. was Mr. Towson, who then within a few months became president of the Pharma Association after resigning from Congress. This single-handedly made problems that were already worse even worse. I just want to walk you through a little bit about Medicare Part D because you have to understand this insanity. Medicare Part D, first of all, you're not buying from Medicare. You're actually buying a plan from a private insurance company. The private insurance company is reimbursed by Medicare. The way Medicare Part D for 2019 will work is that you have a deductible of $450. Any drug cost for the first $450 is out of pocket for you. From $450 to $3,820, you have to pay 25% of the cost. And then the Part B plan that you picked will pay the remaining 75%. After $3,820 to $5,100 is referred to as the donut hole. When the 2003 Act was first passed, this donut hole, every dollar was responsible on the patient. Patients had to pay. But since the Affordable Care Act, the donut hole is becoming smaller and smaller, so that now, as of 2019, it's fully closed, so that patients in the donut hole also have to pay only 25% of the drug cost, and 75% is borne by the plan. Here's where the problem is. After you reach $5,100, though, which in a myeloma patient will be like in a week, patients will pay only 5%. The plan they picked can pay only 15%. 80% of the cost is then transferred to Medicare. So Medicare costs are the hugest. The plans really don't have any incentive to negotiate with pharma, neither do the patients, but Medicare is forbidden from negotiating. So this does not make for a good system. 86% of healthcare CEOs support Medicare negotiation of drug prices. 90% of Americans in various polls support that Medicare should negotiate drug prices. Andy Slavitt once remarked, 90% of Americans don't agree on anything. There are federal agencies which do negotiate, the Veterans Affairs, Department of Defense, and when they negotiate, they do get the prices at much lower level. And if we, just for the top 50 drugs, went to VA prices, Medicare will save $15 billion, just for the first top 50 drugs. Because other countries negotiate and we don't, prices in other countries are actually significantly lower than US prices. The problem we have is that in order to make Medicare actually negotiate, whether it's for Part D or Part B, it requires a significant change in the law, which is harder than Act of God. But what the administration currently is proposed, and it's being discussed, and if it's approved, will come into place maybe next year, is instead of directly negotiating with pharma, is the backdoor route of basically setting what is called the International Reference Pricing or the International Pricing Index, IPI, where you will tell pharma that you will pay no more than 20% or 25% of the cost that other countries are paying, so that you can make use of their negotiating power. The third approach that's being talked about, and I think could work really well, is to facilitate easier entry of generics and biosimilars into the United States. The more number of generics for the same drug, the prices drop. Gleevec, for example, Poland has 20 generics, so the price of Gleevec is a fraction of what it is here. The FDA obstacles for getting generics approved can be overcome if they adopt what Aaron Kesselheim and colleagues and the Brookings institutions have proposed, which is reciprocal approval of drugs that are already in the market in the US. So FDA-approved drugs, where there's a generic available in Germany, France, Canada, for example, you take your pick your best countries, and say you will automatically give them reciprocal approval so that companies need to go only to 1 or 2 countries, get the approval, and then each one of us can help each other out and have generics, more generics across the board. So this is a really good proposal. Hope this comes through. The other one is, of course, if we make the drug ourselves. Even generic manufacturers want to make money. But if there is a truly altruistic, non-profit, philanthropic, generic drug manufacturing company, these are drugs that can be made for pennies, which are being sold for thousands of dollars. So I'm glad that Mayo Clinic has partnered with Intermountain Healthcare and the Arnold Foundation and a number of other organizations to becoming governing members of this group company called Civica RX, which will make generic drugs and have it for low prices. So I'm very happy about that. I want to point out that this is an idea that Mustaqim and I proposed in 2012 in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings article, long before anybody was talking about this. The fourth thing we can do is we have to remove the incentive that we have currently in the US for doctors to give more expensive drugs. Doctors make more money giving the more expensive drugs if it's a drug that's administered in a doctor's office, almost all Part B drugs. Almost all doctor's office administered drugs like bortezomib, zoledronic acid. So here you see, I've got 2 examples. These are drugs that we use for myeloma bone disease. They're also used for osteoporosis, zoledronic acid and denosumab. Denosumab costs $2,000, zoledronic acid costs $60. If somebody gave zoledronic acid, they could take home only $4. But if they gave denosumab, which is equal, now they can take home $130. So there is a built-in incentive for doctors to give the higher cost drug because they can take home more money. Best situation would be to give a flat price regardless of the cost of the drug that will cover the doctor's expenses, and that way you remove the incentive to give more and more expensive treatments. Number 5, this was just proposed, hot off the press, on January 31st by the administration, which to end all rebates. As I told you, this rebate problem is allowing drug prices to go because the person who's supposed to be on your behalf negotiating for low prices benefits from high prices, and because they get a higher rebate with high prices. So if we end rebates altogether, then this idea that you can ask for a higher and higher list price will go. The US government has proposed this now. If it's again approved, it will come into effect January 1st, 2020. We'll see whether this happens or not. Other policy changes that we can make are listed here. I don't have time to discuss this. But what can we do? All of these other things are federal policy levels. I think we can still advocate for this. Many of you are well connected. You can always use your own personal or professional clout with Congress to advocate for these changes. But as an institution and individuals, what can we do? Number 1, I'd say find the lowest cost drug for your patients. Look for it. Use generics and biosimilars if you can. If you have 2 drugs, one is a brand name, one is a generic, even if we as an institution could make more money giving the higher cost drug, if that means higher copay for the patients, let's do what's right. Look at goodrx.com or Blink Health to see for your patients who cannot afford to, insured patients who have already met their deductibles, it doesn't matter. But for patients who have not yet met their deductible, or for patients who are not insured, you can see this is a study done by Lisa Gill in Consumer Reports for the common drugs that people take when they're elderly, Plavix, Lipitor, Cymbalta. You can see the price difference is astonishing. You will not be able to tell me that you can get the same identical product of anything like this for such different prices. $10 for Plavix in Health Warehouse and $141 at CVS. If somebody's on these 5 drugs, they could pay either $66 or $928. This changes every day, every week, depending on how many tablets you prescribe. So unless you check for your patients and advocate, this won't be something that's doable. I asked Nicole Smith on the phone, what she would tell all of us here if she was actually standing here having lost a son due to unaffordable cost of insulin. She told me two things. Number one, talk to your patients about affordability. Because if somebody had told her son there is an insulin available at Walmart for $25, it's the older generation, but it's just as life-saving, he wouldn't have died. But we prescribe Novolog and don't find out whether the patient can actually pay the $300 per vial cost of Novolog, then this happens. Rama Warsami, my colleague, did a study at Mayo and 2 other centers last year or 2 years ago at ASCO. She presented the results where we taped the conversations between patients and physicians in the Mayo Clinic and elsewhere. The topic of cost was brought up only 25% of the time, almost always by the patients, never by the doctor, maybe small amount of time. And almost always the doctor's response was silence or and then change the topic. We're very uncomfortable talking.
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
Second is, she asked me to tell you that we should advocate for our patients. We need to advocate for change. We need to advocate for low prices, not only at the state level, but federal level. And this is something we did. Ayalu Teferi and Hagab Kantarjian did this and published in the Mayo Clinic proceedings. I think an article that started this conversation where 118 oncologists came together writing a letter, very strong letter in the proceedings that things have to change. And it was on all of the news media you can think of. It was carried by all of the TV stations, all of the newspapers, and it had an impact. And I think we need to continue to advocate for these things. And you can advocate through as well. I will stop here. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.